Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fourth episode of Retuning Your Firm. And delighted to welcome a great panel today. Our key themes today, we're looking at the area of working arrangements and to what extent are people finding remote working helpful for them, helpful for their firm. We're looking at the whole area of technology, not as technology per se, but how can firms actually use technology to give great and innovative services to their clients. And we're also looking at the whole area of what's going on in the property world and how can an architectural firm, and a pretty major one at that, how have they adapted to this interesting space of time that we've been going through. So let's move on. I'm happy to say, I'll just run you quickly through it gets to be a standard slide, but I think it's really interesting. So what are some 7 strategies for retuning your firm? First of all, think big. As Lewis Carroll said, believe 6 impossible things before breakfast. Remember that you are the power of your relationships, but that if you don't reciprocate, it just becomes another directory. Think small. Focus on things that actually resonate with your key audiences. That's really, really important, I always think. Do a campaign, don't do a one-off. Think about how you can convert people from an audience into an actual community and then work with them. And I think this series has proved that can work really well. Drop convention, be willing to look at new things and new ideas. I always say the gainsayers have retreated into their caves. They may be coming back soon, who knows, but certainly there's a period, as many managing partners have said, gosh, for the first time ever, I can do all the things I really wanted to do and there's nobody getting in the way. So take advantage of that. Remember that, again, picking up the same point, speed is of the essence. Now the key here is your assumptions. If you don't think about your campaigns in terms of the underlying assumptions, you won't be as effective as you could be. So articulate them, market test them when you actually roll it out. And if they prove invalid, and some will, then amend them and pivot in a new direction. It's called new start. Be entrepreneurial. Keep listening and innovating. The most important word in that sentence, listening. 2 ears, 1 mouth. And remember that, because if you're not listening to your clients, you're unlikely to be giving them the services and that they are actually needing. And I'd like to thank Elena Kudsko of Globsec in Bratislava for her input on that. So let's move on to where we're at today. Who's coming in today? Well, Carlo Cordasco is a research associate. He's at Sheffield University Management School. He has been looking into the whole area of working arrangements, particularly around remote working, and has been very helpful in the poll that we will shortly be running, so that will give us all an opportunity to understand the attitudes of what is essentially the CEOs and C-suite for mid-sized firms in our sector. Matthew Streets follows on after that. Matthew is the Senior Executive Partner and Managing Partner of Foster & Partners. I don't think I've ever put so many partners in the same sentence. But he is somebody who isn't an architect, but he's been very much the driver in terms of the leader of that practice, which, as you many will know, is one of the most successful in the world, with the Apple Donut and the Bloomberg Building and many, many others behind, into their credit. So, but how do you manage and lead a group of creatives, and how has that happened during a period of lockdown? That, again, I think will be really interesting to hear. Francesca, for those of you who haven't been on the call before, Francesca is our anchor tenant, ray of sunshine, I call her. And she also, on her day job, is actually probably the point person for the whole of Grant Thornton International. So there's very little going on around the world that Francesca's unaware of in terms of her firm, I suspect. And lastly, but by absolutely no means least, Ed Turner, who is the managing partner of Taylor Vinters. Those who are not law firms, everyone will know Taylor Vinters. In other sectors, perhaps not. Very innovative, very interesting firm that has been very much at the forefront of using new technologies for the last sort of X years. He'll tell you how long, but Oxford, Cambridge, London based. But Ed says, I'm not a technologist, I'm a lawyer, but I understand enough about technology to see how it can be useful for clients. And I think that's really the right attitude. So that then obviously you're truly doing what I do, which is to host. So that's really our lineup today, and that's the order in which they'll be appearing. So let's moving on. Let's talk a little bit about what came up last week. And I'm not showing you all the slides because obviously there were, I think I'll show you a few, but there were 10, I think, and they're all available on the website, obviously, in the management library. So what is it that firms feel is the experience that their firms offer? And if you recall, the poll was on employer brand management systems, which is a bit of a mouthful, but the point here is that yes, you can have a brand, but unless you manage it, which means having a system, you probably aren't going to get to a good place. So what is it that people felt were the most important elements in their firms? And the two that jump out quite strictly are colleagues, culture, and pride in what the firm does. I'm afraid the management team only got 14%, but hey, that's life. So that gives you a sense as to where people culturally feel their firms are at. And I'm sure those who are on the call today will relate to that. It was quite strong there. We then looked, I thought this was a particularly worrying a bit of feedback, because it's quite a simple question really, isn't how satisfied are you that people in employment issues, including your internal and external reputation as an employer, receive the necessary understanding, leadership, measurement, urgency and coherence? 12% very satisfied, 63 quite, 5% we have a problem, and not yet 21. I mean, those numbers are a bit depressing, I think. Now, whether you say that's the HR agenda, I think as people businesses, it's a much, much bigger agenda than the HR agenda. So again, some of you I know will have been completing this last week because we got some regular viewers, but that kind of worried me, and so I'd love to see if we run that one again in maybe 6 months' time. Are we getting anywhere better to very satisfied? Because if not, then you're really missing a trick as leaders. I can promise you that. Thanks, Simon Barrow, for that great question, by the way. What are the barriers? Because at the end of the day, there's usually barriers. Changing business priorities. Yeah, but well, I don't know about that one, because every time we go and ask what business priorities are, they all kind of seem to come down to 4 or 5 areas. It's to use of tech, it's to operation efficiency, it's people skills, it's strategy clarity. I mean, those are the ones that, and that was the case a year ago and a year before that. So I think there's a little bit of a cop out there, but maybe that's just my personal view. People not recognizing what the employer brand really is, that it's actually about the employment experience, lack of data, nothing new there, lack of money, fair enough. And then on down, you can see that. So luckily, lack of senior management support was almost as bottom of the list. So it shows at least we're trying to do something right. We're not getting in the way, which is good to see. Okay, given that the need for leaders to show these values are reality, what's been happening during the pandemic, and this is where the cookie really hits the fan, because these are the things that, quite frankly, if you're not showing these behaviors, everybody's going to copy whatever you are doing. And that's not necessarily a good thing to happen. So about 5% of firms, none of them were true. So at least some of them, everybody's doing something across one of these top 5, but none of them hit more than 63%. And that means there's 40 plus in the other direction. Now, whether it's around transparency, accessibility, sharing pain, valuing your people as highly as other stakeholders, or just telling people what the strategic options for the business are. I think all those numbers really should be a bit higher if you really do want to, in the new normal, make sure your firm is in as best placed as it possibly could be. So lastly, and this is possibly the one that's a real crunchy one, and Simon Barrow, who was on last week, was the one who came up with these questions. I think it's just amazing. And there's a lovely issue here, because if finance and cash flow is indeed the topic that carries the most weight during partner directed discussions on current issues, that's fine. But then when you start unwrapping it, and I'm an accountant, so maybe I can find it easier than others, but actually in the current climate, your clients, your lockup's going to be pretty hard to shift. Some of your clients getting new work's tough. Your clients some of them will be in industries where they won't be giving you as much work as before. So the area you're probably going to look at initially is your expenditure, because that's, £1 saved is the same as £5 of new business for 20% margin business. So not too complicated. So firm supply chain, 0%. And now whether there's just a disconnect in people's minds between cash flow and expenditure, I don't know. But to me, cash flow is a two-way thing, involves both income and expenditure. And I think probably too much attention maybe is being placed on the first bit, on the revenue bit, and not enough being placed on the expenditure, because actually, quite frankly, it's the quickest and easiest way to have money in the bank is not to spend it. So there you go. Good thought. You can see the rest. Anyway, those were the feedback from last week. And obviously, as always, I always remind myself of this because it's quite hard to get feedback like this. Government continues to say that what we're doing is incredibly valuable. And Carlo was saying to me, he's on a bit later, that actually from the university side, again, having this sort of flow of up-to-date, honest data is incredibly valuable for the academic world as well, because it's very hard for them all their field work has stopped in terms of their projects, because Carl and I are working on a big project at the moment around innovation. So anyway, let's now move on to today's poll. And This one is about remote working arrangements, which sounds a bit boring at one level, but it's actually pretty fundamental. And what we try to look at here is almost like, have attitudes changed? In other words, pre-lockdown, how were people feeling? Post-lockdown, what's happened? Have attitudes changed in terms of both personal and also business level? First of all, pre-lockdown, to what extent did people believe that it would impact people's productivity? More than half of you saw that as being previously something that would decrease productivity, 56%, 21% no impact, and a little over 20% saw it as increasing productivity. So that's where we started off from. I appreciate this is very hard to remember quite how you must have felt in the past, but subject to that, that's really helpful. Now, this is fascinating because actually what you're now seeing is that the decrease has fallen away from more than half to about a quarter. No impact has actually been gone up a bit, but actually the increase one has gone up from, let's see, what was it before? Apologies. It's gone up from 20% to 50%. So we've seen a massive shift in attitudes there from what people thought was the case to actually what's been happening. And to what extent has it actually impacted productivity? 16%, it's too early to judge, that's fair enough. But those who have actually said nobody really has seen it decreasing, and if anything, there's an emphasis on it increasing. So that's fascinating, really fascinating. I'm sure the academics will go all over that one. I can see Carlo nodding in the background. So what about personal, if you like? Did people enjoy it? If some people, 16% didn't really have insufficient experience of working remotely to form a view, fair enough. But those who, very few people don't enjoy it is the message. So people like working from home. That's not, perhaps, sorry, working remotely, I shouldn't say from home. It is, technically it is different. I mean, sorry if I misled you there. And how many people would like to spend almost all their time in the office? Well, 2%, 11 at 2. I mean, there's a shift in attitudes here, which is quite interesting, isn't it? From the leadership point of view, if you ignore these trends, you will find people desert you in a friendly way. Policy, yep, people had policies. Most of them have now been revised because I suspect many of those policies made it walking through treacle in order to get agreement to, given everybody thought it was not such a good idea. And some of you are still, 7% have no plans to write one. I think that's probably a little bit unwise. I think people do actually like to know what policy is when they're working for you. So I would counsel you all to have a policy, even if you haven't got one at the moment. To pre-lockdown, to what extent were your people permitted to work remotely? But in the middle, really. Nobody was really sort of, there were some people who were sort of, permitted only in exceptional circumstances. That was 10% or so. About the same being actively encouraged. So mostly it was kind of neutral is what I would take away from that. So it's about 3. Where's my cursor? Sorry. Pre-lockdown, to what extent did eligible people take advantage of working remotely? About the same. Some people, a few, everyone took advantage, and few, hardly anyone did. And then it kind of takes you into the sort of whole peer pressure piece, which is actually really interesting for the last 2. So did you feel peer pressure to work from the office? Yeah, that was there. That's quite strong. 1 and 2, that's more than half of them. So there was, whereas only 18% or so were actually felt that colleagues were cool with me working remotely. And to what extent, therefore, and this is a fascinating one, do you now feel pressurized to return to the office? 40%, no pressure at all. 32%, number 2, nobody getting strong pressure. Well, there's some really powerful messages there for management, I think. If you don't shape your firm's policies to fit around those sort of messages, then it doesn't matter what Boris says, excuse the French, but it isn't going to happen. So that will have all sorts of implications, I suspect, for the property industry, which Matthew may want to give a few thoughts on a bit later again. But before I do that, I would like to ask Carlo to come, and I will stop screen sharing, and I'll ask Carlo to come and give his insight, as he's the one who actually drafted the questions. So fascinated to hear what he, from a sort of more academic perspective, if that's the right terminology, how he thinks we should be thinking about and approaching this particular issue. So I'll leave you in peace for a second, and over to Carlo.
Right. Thank you, Richard, again. And I mean, let me thank you again for the invaluable work you're doing with respect to those polls. Those are providing really great insights for our work, and in particular for the sort of work we're doing right now on working arrangements. Now, I must say there's a lot of interesting results coming out of those polls. Basically, what we were trying to investigate, and it ended up in this poll, was what actually were the forces preventing change in working arrangements within professional business services firms. And one of those, conventional stories that you hear is normally that basically professionals really don't like working from home. So that's one of the stories that we hear. Another story that I actually found a lot more plausible was that there are a lot of beliefs around expectations of losses in productivity as a result of institutionalized forms of remote working arrangements. So basically, what I think emerged from those polls is that this second story about expectation of losses in productivity is somewhat true. I mean, we've seen that actually people think that, people report they used to think that remote working arrangements are somewhat connected to losses in productivity. And it's amazing that these empirical expectations have changed in the face of the COVID-19 crisis and in the face of experimenting actually with remote working arrangements. So this is something that is really, really important to understand, because if those empirical expectations on productivity in remote working arrangements change, then also the default position on working arrangements could change, shifting from working from the office to working from home. And what I found also particularly relevant coming out of the poll is the idea, is the question of sort of surrounding conventions and social norms, right? So what I think COVID-19 has dramatically changed, and the lockdown has dramatically changed, is the default position. And so, I mean, imagine you work in a professional services. I mean, you don't have to imagine, but I do have to. So when you work for professional services firms, you have empirical expectations on what other people do. You observe your colleagues, you observe your peers. They show up at the office every day, right? And so you know that in circumstances X, those people will do Y. So in a normal working day, they will work from the office normally, right? And then you also form normative expectations. So you think that other people think that you should do the same, essentially, right? And so that's the sort of peer pressure. Perhaps it's not explicit, it's totally informal, and it stems from your observation of the workplace, right? What happens with a lockdown, with a crisis such as the COVID-19 crisis, is that those empirical expectations are reverted entirely, right? You do not observe those patterns anymore. And so your normative expectations are not tailored to those empirical expectations. You get to talk to people about working arrangements, and so you form new beliefs. And that's why we see that the peer pressure that was there before the lockdown is not there anymore. And so the key message that I think we should get from those polls is that how firms want to arrange work after the lockdown is entirely up to them, and it's about shaping people's expectations. So if managing partners of firms really want to incentivize remote working because they now believe it has no impact on productivity, it could actually make firms save money on premises and estate or things like that. I mean, it's about shaping people's expectations, right? So if you want to do this, it's just about talking to people and making clear there are no strings attached to people who choose to work remotely. There are no informal sanctions connected to that. Your career path is not going to be impacted. On the other hand, if at the end of the day, because it's really early to actually tell what the impact on productivity will be, you'll figure out that actually working from the office has some really important implication, then you might want to go back and revert those social norms to where they were before. So it's all about shaping empirical and normative expectations in order to understand how to manipulate working arrangements within the firm. And those are basically my 2 cents. I hope I made it in the 5 minutes timeline.
Oh, thanks, Carlo. That was really good. And thanks, Catherine, by the way, for that comment. She said that she thinks it's too soon to say that productivity increases with remote working. And it may be the fact that management has paid so much more attention to individual people that that has been almost like the Hawthorne effect, going back to that ancient study where it didn't matter whether you turned the lights on or off, everybody got more productive. Reason because they were being someone was paying attention to them the first time. So the point made is it's discretionary work that is suffering and not necessarily people are then focusing on what is measured. That gives Matthew, who's now going to join us. As I mentioned, Matthew is the managing partner of Foster and Partners and has the enviable task of herding creatives. So I'll leave you in Matthew's capable hands for 5 minutes.
Morning, everybody. Let me just set the timer off because Richard's a dragon. So let's do that. Good. Good morning, everybody. So Foster and Partners, we're 1,500 people, architects, about 1,200 of us in London, and the remainder in 12 offices around the world. We're actually a series of limited companies, despite our title, but the constitution is a partnership, and it's in that context I'm not a CEO. I'm a managing partner by consensus, and that's good and difficult. The key pieces for me, and I'll just run through some things and maybe it will help with the discussion. Agility and communication have been the two key things, I think, for us over the last few months. Back in the beginning of March, set up an MCOM, an emergency committee. We met daily until the beginning of this month, when we actually are now down to 2 days a week. That was looking at all the impacts, both immediate, making very short-term decisions, daily decisions, to planning ahead. And we came up with proposals for the exec. So not a full board meeting, but the exec met daily again for 2 months. That's now down to 2 days a week as well, in order to form that into clear policies that were agreed and then communicated to the whole practice. I write a daily email, have done now for nearly 4 months. Sometimes it's very short. It always starts with, or sometimes starts with an intro, but the first thing is communicates is how many people have been ill, and that's just whether they had cold, flu or fever-like symptoms, and how many have recovered and how many are seriously ill. I'm delighted to say that nobody has been, only 3 people have been seriously ill. No one has, everyone has recovered, and we've had 107 cases so far, of which 106 have recovered. But so that ties into what were the overarching priorities. They were health of colleagues, number one, and then protecting employment. And I think now we've moved into the next step, which is all about more medium and long-term planning as things have evolved. We were ahead of the government early on, stopping flights, starting working from home, partly because we have 4 offices in China. So that was, we could see it up close early, what the impacts were. We did surveys of our colleagues there and used that to inform all decisions back home. I think clearly it's massively easier all in and all out than it is going to be going forward when it's partially in and partially out, with all the nuances that has. We've achieved amazing results, far better than we thought, with going to your survey earlier, most of our work being more productive, most of our colleagues being more productive than we thought they would be. But having said that, as our colleagues in China, some of them have been back for a couple of months, it is clear that they're massively more productive in reality in the office than they are at home. So part of it's a mindset, and people have really taken on a challenge. And I think it depends what work you do. We're in a creative world. We need teamwork. We need collaboration, and quite a lot of that's missing. We also are very heavy on use of software, which can cause delays if it's all remote working. I think morale is important. So that's part of the daily missive piece that I do, but we've put a whole load of initiatives into the office, from well-being to training to lessons for children, to inspirational talks. Even had Eddie the Eagle, Sally Kettle, and then we did a whole piece on designing scrubs and designing visors that we put on open source. We've made 40,000 of them, given them to local hospitals, and drawn scrubs and given those to the patterns to local charities. All of that was really important actually for morale. Morale's got tougher, I'd say. 3 months in, any excitement or novelty has worn off. And it's fine maybe for managing partners who may be lucky enough to have houses with gardens, but a lot of our colleagues don't. They live in flat shares, and not, without gardens and without subsidised food and things that they would have in the office. So in fact, a lot of them haven't saved money. It's costing them more, and it's grim. And it's quite interesting. We did surveys for who wanted to come back, and unsurprisingly, quite a lot of people did want to come back, notwithstanding the results of this survey. Transparency is absolutely key. Not only just on, I think, sickness, but on all the things that we've done as we now head back to the office. We've got currently 10% back in the office, between 10 and 14 daily. We expect to be up to 25 to 30 by the end of September. Back in the office on a daily basis, not the same 10 or 20% at anyone, on every day. In terms of protecting the company, we asked our colleagues for a 20% voluntary pay cut back in March. 5 minutes, I'll stop very quickly, Richard. And 99%, over 99% said yes. We did that for three months. We stopped it at the end of June, and we are we hope to repay that before the end of the year, because actually so far things have been better than we expected. We're now looking at much more at the next 3 to 6 months than just the immediate challenge. I'm happy to take questions at the end on how it's changing the world of office life. We're definitely going to change in terms of technology that we're going to use. We're going to reorganize how we work on the campus, but I don't think we're going to move to everybody working at home. I'm happy to have that as a wider discussion later. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. That was a whistle-stop tour, and I mean, I think lots of people thinking you've kind of ticked a lot of boxes there. So well done, thank you. Francesca, come and join us. And you've got a really interesting space. We've got more questions, and we've got more chat going on about this around has productivity. Is it too early to say? And what's your take on that whole issue?
Yeah, no,
fascinating.
It is fascinating, isn't it? And I'm not surprised we're getting lots of questions and insight from people, because we're all coping with this. And as someone beautifully said the other day, maybe before you had a couple of offices or 10 offices or even 20 offices, but now you've got hundreds of offices, because everywhere that people work is an office, and they have their own individual things going on, be it around what they're having to cope with in their working environment, or childcare, or the many other things that are happening. For those of us who've worked from home intermittently for the last 25 years, I kind of go, well, I'm really glad everyone knows now what it's like, because obviously working from home is hardly a new thing. And I think for many of us, it's been the salvation for our careers and enabled us to carry on working in the way that we work. So, I mean, I'm a massive fan, and I've always encouraged people to work from home for some of the time, but there are massive challenges. And I think it's coming through about that productivity piece that we've just been talking about, and also around what people really want to do. And I think, Matthew, you spoke beautifully about how you're trying to keep people motivated, and not everybody finds working from home terribly motivating. It's hugely dependent on the job that they do, and it's hugely dependent on their own personality as well. So just picking up on those, in terms of the people, people like people. If you're in professional services, you're probably a people kind of person. Even if you're a deep technical specialist, you like to bounce ideas off, you like to walk down the corridor, you like to chat to somebody about the issues going on. And although you can do that through technology, it is a different experience. And there's some wonderful, wonderful research from Microsoft that came out a couple of weeks ago that told you everything you already knew, that your brain works differently over the laptop. Of course it does, but it's really quite interesting to see how differently your brain works and how you spark in a different way. And the more you need to feed off creativity, a lot of people in professional services are solving complex problems. You want that creative buzz. And that is a little bit harder. You have to work harder. It is exhausting being on Teams or Zoom or whatever your IT of choice is for 8-9 hours a day. And you need to be able to get away from it and deal with things in a different way. Interestingly, we've had a few meetings where we've said, we'll just do it by phone. We'll switch off the video because people just need a break from that. And then we put it on at certain times, and we do a slightly different element to our meeting during that. I work with people around the world, and there's a massive issue, a cultural issue around how you react over the laptop, and also around the difficulty of language over the laptop. And though I love Google Translate, it doesn't always quite capture the nuance. So that's interesting challenge. I think just to pick up on the productivity point, a wonderful point from somebody, and I'm sorry, I'm just looking for the name of who mentioned it. Vivian, great point, was some productivity levels are being skewered by people not taking holidays. So I think a massive factor, and you see a lot of all good employers at the moment are encouraging people to take breaks, take holiday, take some time off, look after their mental well-being. And I know we've talked many times on this program, Richard, about people's mental welfare during this particular pandemic and how they're coping. The good piece to bring out of this, though, is that remote working can enable people to work in a different way, particularly those who have long commutes, urban travel that maybe is an hour each way or longer, and them finding themselves much more productive. The problem often is the bleed from the work life into their personal life, and can you do the switch off your IT and have a true break? I know many people I speak to are saying they're just working longer. They've got rid of their commute and replaced it with an extra 3 hours of time on the laptop. So I think there's a piece there about the education for ourselves and respecting the need to have breaks, but also about what you mean by productivity. Are we really being productive, or are we just working a lot? And those of us who remember a world long time ago where you used to put your jacket on the chair when you went to lunch so people thought you were still there, or you walked out the door at 6 o'clock and someone said, having a half day. Hopefully that element of it has gone, and people are more mindful about what good work looks like and about the need for a little space and time and thoughtfulness. Over back to you, Richard.
Thanks very much, Francesca. That, as always, was insightful and helpful, so in equal measure, so appreciate that. Ed, you've been kind of, I think, listening to us for 20 minutes or so now, whilst we got the poll, and then there seems to be focusing a little bit on productivity, which obviously technology has a space, but I'd love to hear your take and where you think we're at, and then give your insight from your managing partner perspective.
Thanks, Richard. So I think you briefed me to talk a little bit about technology. So if we're looking at retuning the future, I think you had me down as someone who knew about technology and was from an innovative firm. I'm flattered, but I'm not, as you said, I'm not a technologist. But my areas of interest relate to organisational purpose, mission and culture. So what I intend to do today is just talk through what I believe are the most important contextual considerations in developing post-COVID technology strategies, and then relate that to our experience and thinking at TV. So my experience with implementation of new technology is that they're almost always expensive at the outset, more expensive than you expect. It can be hugely distracting, even if it goes well, and it can be doubly distracting if it's managed badly. And its success will be significantly more than 50% down to context rather than the actual technology itself, the effectiveness of technology. So, in that, what I mean by context there is the relevance to your organizational strategy, particularly alignment with culture, the culture of the organization, how we work, how we think about things. And then finally, operational design and whether there is a complementary change going on. So my experience is that technology rarely drives change, but it can support it. So it's sort of looking at that way round. So in terms of then what that means, I think my sense is that success will be even, what will be even more determinant of success where technologies directly touch clients. Because you asked me to talk about client-facing technology. I think that those issues become even more pertinent where the client is involved, because the client will have a very strong sense of their expectation, their feeling about that they get from your organization. I think that's something we underestimate. So whether the technology supports existing models of delivery, or whether perhaps you're looking at introducing new models where the technology itself is the engine of value, I think those factors remain totally crucial. And so much of the value of professional services comes ultimately from how we make our clients feel. I mean, trust is crucial in that. Often clients buy from us reassurance. They're not buying legal services. No one needs legal services, or specifically accountancy. They're looking for reassurance that what they're doing is okay, that the risks they don't understand and manage. So if there's any misalignment between a new technology and the client's broader experience of the organization, then that will make them feel uncomfortable. And similarly, if they sense the lack of support or buy-in within the organization for new technology, again, that will undermine the trust they have in the organization and the people that they look to. So get your own people and your clients to back a new technology. It must align, in my view, with the broader experience they're looking for and their expectation, and that technology should enhance that underlying expectation. So for us, in terms of implementing technology in this COVID situation, as Carlo so well explained, we've had this reset in expectation. We have this opportunity, the status quo has been unlocked. So for us, the first step with looking at new technology post-COVID was to check in on ourselves. What had we learned from the COVID experience in terms of what was important to our people, our clients, what's happening in society as a whole? So it's not about what technology is available, it's about how we feel and what's important to us right now. The second step was then to consider the implications of this for our organizational idea. Was our organizational idea still aligned? Was it authentic for what we were actually feeling? And then look at that and say, right, was the mission still relevant that was dictated by that? And then I guess where we start to think where technology might start to come in is what are the priorities that we had set for ourselves near term pre-COVID? What are they now? And I think that's where we can see some input from our experience. Those first two haven't changed. That was reassuring. We had that continuity running through. Sorry, my alarm's going off, which tells me something, doesn't it? So finally, we then look at what's available to us that could help us achieve those goals, including technology, but it might not just be technology. And I think the key for me is that by taking this approach, you have a clear framework against which you can make your decisions about technology investment and certainly prioritizing that investment when there's a long list of things which we all kind of feel a pressure, we should be doing these things. And it brings to mind the Does It Make the Boat Go Faster book by Harriet Beveridge, where, the Olympic rowing team, you ask, once you've got that framework, you can go, does doing this help us to be what we want to be? So for us, we want to, we're about helping innovators and entrepreneurs make great things happen. So if we implement this, is that going to make us better at doing that? And if it doesn't, let's not do it. And actually, funny enough, a lot of what our clients expect, they are about the technology, they're about the innovation. They want some empathy from us. They're not looking for us to be them. They want us to help them. And so that alignment is there. So I've run out of time. I can talk about examples if anyone has any questions, but hopefully that gives a sense of the process that we're going through and our perspective on technology post-COVID.
I don't think you mentioned the S word, strategy, but in a funny way, what I'm hearing you saying, Ed, is it in line? Is it on strategy? Is this? It's a bit like the British cycle team that said, hey, we need to make every single element of the bike and the rider fit for purpose, because every minor little improvement will get us closer to the goal of being the fastest around the track. So
yeah,
great, thank you.
I'm always a bit tentative with sports analogies, and I know I just brought up a rowing one, so shoot me. But fundamentally, I kind of the sport's easy because the goal is so clear and straightforward to win the race, to be the fastest boat. And there's a clarity in it. I think the reason I didn't talk about strategy is because I think the combination of purpose, mission, and priorities is strategy.
Yeah.
But breaking it down and thinking about what is my organization for must be where you start. because otherwise each stage you're weakening. It gets weaker the further away you get from that original piece of thinking.
Matthew, come and give us your take. We've had a bit about, well, as I said, purpose, clarity of, etc. Where do you rank that as in terms of your personal goals? You have to unmute.
We all use different technology. I haven't made that mistake for a while, but thank you. We always use slightly different words, really. I think whether it's purpose, it's transparency, it's clarity, and honesty, so that people really believe what you're saying. And I think that's even more important when everyone's remote, because even amongst your colleagues, I find it, management board meetings are definitely different with everybody being on a screen. Some people feel they can say things they'd never dare say if we were all face to face. Other people are just quieter. It's harder to bring that out. And some people are just dominant voices, and it's harder to contain those. I find, maybe I'm just not so good at it as some of you. But I think when communicating with the practice as a whole, first of all, I think you need to communicate with a broader group of people when everyone's away, because everyone's missing those little interactions where people gather information and collect little bits of information. And then I think what I tried to focus on was building on the culture, which was already something we were working on before, but I thought got more importance, because that sense of community belonging in it together is something that's really important. And I think that's the challenge for people coming back. I mean, it's huge for our younger colleagues. They're not learning how they would before. They can't just turn around and ask or see what other people are doing, can't build the networks that the older people have. And we have projects with teams, and those teams change. So it's fine. What we're finding is that people are using the same team to do just different projects. It's not necessarily the best team to do those different projects. It's because that team are used, have found a way of working together, and trying to build a team from scratch or remotely is not as good. So that answers some of your questions.
Yeah, this point about teams is really interesting, and people they always used to say that one of the biggest, toughest things for, say, law firms was actually wresting project management, in the sense of choosing people to go on the team away from the partners, because otherwise they always went down the corridor with their favorite people that they knew and rely on, because that gave them an easier life.
Yes.
Francesca, do you have any thoughts on that aspect? Sure you do.
Yeah, it's such an important area, and I think there's just picking up on some of the questions around this as well, is how do you keep people connected as a team while still enabling them to work effectively? Because you can spend an awful lot of time doing things that are connecting, but then are you actually really truly connecting, or are you just rocking up to an event because you feel that you ought to be on that particular call? Are you really connecting properly? And some of the things I've seen that have really worked effectively over these last few weeks have been where people have done things a little bit differently. I mean, just simple stuff. We had dinner the other day, our leadership team. We sat down and we had dinner together, and we had not a work agenda. We just talked about what was going on in our lives, and it was a sort of connecting point that was really valuable. But I've also seen people be really effective about doing calls that are much more thoughtful in terms of their length, not doing big long events, and also doing a lot of breakouts within calls, where you can disappear off into a little breakout room, have a smaller call, come back together, a bit like you might do in a normal meeting where 2 or 3 of you might go and grab a coffee somewhere. That's worked very well. I just want to pick up one other thing, Richard. It was a nice question from Arif around, are people actually paying for people when they're working at home, in sense of buying equipment, helping support them beyond perhaps the basic IT? And it'd be great to hear people's views. I know to begin with, everyone was just make and do, but if remote working becomes part of your life, you do have an obligation to make that place a good place to work. And it'd be good to hear what people are doing around that. We're certainly moving towards providing some basic working from home equipment for those who don't have them. But it is quite a challenging area. Is, how do you cap it? How do you make sure that it's relevant for work? And I suspect that Matthew and Ed will have some thoughts on that too.
Yeah, well, I think, sorry, Ed, if you wanted to
Yeah, come on in, so please.
I mean, I think the second bit is critical too. Yes, at the moment the government has relaxed the health and safety rules, and so because a lot of people are working on sofas, on kitchen tables, and none of which will comply with normal health and safety. And by the way, will be very bad for them, for their backs and everything. And there'll be a lot of work for chiropractors coming shortly. So, I mean, it's important that HR teams are looking at that and have the policies for that. If nobody used to work from home and now lots of people are and will be for sustained time. I mean, we initially paid for lots of laptops, lots of monitors for people to be able to use LogMeIn to get back to the power of the computer in the office. I think we emergently spent about £500,000 on doing that, but we allowed a few people who needed upstand desks and stuff. We had our delivery people deliver those to their houses, and we've delivered about 150 chairs around as well. But that was just trying to facilitate in the early days very quickly. Everybody being able to work at home and try and not miss a beat. I think going forward, I think everyone's got to work out, you need to be clear on your policy about what is and isn't allowed. And particularly if it's going to be 2 days in and 3 days, as in 2 days in the office and say 3 days at home or vice versa, you might find that you haven't saved so much if you're going to be effectively running 2 offices, because you can't carry monitors in and out, and you can't, most of our guys need, or teams rather, need 2 monitors, so they've now got 4 monitors or whatever, unless you've got the technology set up so you can all do more agile working in the office, which we used not to have, and we're going to look towards that. So we'll be investing quite a lot in changing our technology so that people can move. At the moment, of course, you can't have hot desks. It's not really the thing with the virus. But going forward, one would imagine that there'll be more of that and much more flexible working. Sorry, Ed, I don't know if you had a view.
Yeah, well, the only thing I would add is that I think naturally our focus at the moment in terms of working practice is focused on physical, so place, where we work. So when we talk about flexibility, we talk about remote working, but in reality, I think there is a broader opportunity to look at flexibility beyond simply place, to look at time, when we work, where we work, how we work, and to acknowledge that different folks, different strokes, it's just what works for different people and different roles. And I think so. If I'd had more time, I'd have talked about the priorities that we have in terms of what we're thinking about for technology, and one of those is about supporting flexibility of working, and that's we think is about transparency both ways on. So it's not about not trusting our employees, but it's about them feeling trust in the allocation of work. So when they're not sat in the office and they can't hear what's going on, there can be a disconnect between, am I getting my fair share? Am I getting the opportunities for development? So what can we do? How can technology help put out there what's available? How can we get that communication about who's got capacity, who wants particular types of work? I would really like to work on this kind of project because I lack experience on it. Please can you think of me in that way? And they might be natural conversations when we're all in the office all the time. And I think, from our perspective, we're looking at the future as a hybrid as to place, but also the opportunity to make the relationship we have with our teams much more flexible. And that's not that we shift to an entire consultancy-based approach at all, but it's about saying, okay, what can we take best of both worlds here and make sure that where we work is also aligned with what we're doing. So don't come in the office. I don't want to see my lawyers come into a more limited office space and put ear defenders on or put their buds in order to get on with a contract that they don't want to distract from. Come in the office to be sociable, to collaborate, to have conversations, to do the updates. But we're a long way off culturally and technology at the moment of being able to shift that priority. And there was a really good point someone raised on the chat earlier about that it was a question of so we're losing out on discretionary work. because in terms of expectations from employees are doing what they're measured on, and that we might get more efficiency from it, but we're losing discretionary work. I think that's absolutely right. But also there's an observation, which is we filled our time with stuff that probably a lot of it didn't need doing or didn't actually deliver the mission. So we've got to get better at setting the objectives and measuring outcomes for stuff that isn't mainstream, but have better goal setting, because if we have better goal setting, people get on with it, and they'll get on with it in the best space possible.
Yeah, and you have to work out also how to, having got clarity around those goals, how to share them so that people actually understand what their contribution is. Because I would say a conversation in the management committee takes you so far, but unless you can cascade it within the organization, and tech can be quite useful there, then nothing changes. And if nothing changes, the clients don't notice generally, because management typically doesn't engage directly with clients much in our sectors. Carlo, you've obviously been listening in to the conversations that have been taking place amongst three very senior management partners in our sector, and obviously you as a researcher possibly have a different perspective. But the point I think a lot of people picked up was this idea that we are now working in a space where the existing norms have been uprooted. Have you sort of thought from a perspective of how long that period lasts? Is there a sort of, are we in a situation where people are used to change and therefore comfortable with more change? Or are people going to say, oh, I've had enough change for now, please can I go back to a steady state, even if it's a new normal rather than an old normal? Do you have any thoughts on that from a sort of more academic perspective? Be interesting to hear.
Thank you for the question. That's really the big unknown, I would say. That's something we're trying to figure out. That's why we ask questions about people's normative expectations and going back to the office. I mean, we really want to know if professionals feel pressure to go back in order to understand whether that norm is going to be resilient at some point. But I think what really emerged from the conversation that I think is really interesting is that working remotely, working from the office is not a binary choice. There are a lot of plausible equilibrium in the middle that we must find. And what we know from our research on professional services is that the work of professionals is by definition an independent sort of work, which is not to say that there is not team working or stuff like that, but professionals tend to do a lot of independent kind of work. And so as Ed said, the sort of working arrangement will depend precisely on what kind of tasks and what kind of work people is doing at a certain time, at a certain point in time, right? So it might be the case that you're doing a lot of independent work in a certain moment, and so you really need to concentrate and focus, and so you might perfectly choose remote working arrangements. It might be a moment in which you really need to collaborate, speak to people, and so the office becomes the ideal place. The key thing, though, is to try and free professionals from norms that could potentially pose up barriers in choosing the appropriate and optimal way of working, right? So it might be the case that, certain kind of norms in the workplace will make you go to the office even when you have to do independent sort of work that you could do from home with much more focus. Or it might be the case, conversely, that you really do some team working for which the office is the really appropriate location. But now the new norm of remote working is such that people only connect through Zoom or through Google Meet, right? So the crucial thing there is trying to free up people from norms in order to make them coordinate and converge on the optimal solutions related to the kind of tasks they are performing. So these are my 2 cents, really.
I think $2 and better. So thank you, sir, for that. We've now actually sadly come to that moment when I have to thank our panelists, which is the easiest part of the show because they've been amazing. And quickly kind of just take you through some of the things that we're doing, because actually we've got a few new interesting things to mention today. Obviously the video library. I wasn't quite sure what image to use for employer brand management systems. Possibly the gorilla is a little bit inappropriate, but you'll know where I'm coming from. The gym, we've now been taking a number of the polls and we've turned them into diagnostics. I'm calling this time for a mental workout. There's a couple in there now, procurement maturity and employer brand. There's an innovation one going in shortly, and there'll also be one inclusiveness. So if you want to take 5 minutes out, just go and, find out what your particular scores are. The good news is that you get to see your score, the average, the highest and the lowest scores for the sector, and it's all instant. And if you do it with colleagues and you can compare the gaps, it's a bit like in a meeting where they say, if you've got 5 people in the meeting, you ask all of them to write down independently what is the purpose of the meeting, you will end up with 5 different issues. So how do you cope with that? Well, answer, you try and decide where you're starting from and where you're going to, because otherwise, guess what? Any road will take you there. This is the fun one. This is the one that's coming soon. We're soon going to be able to give you a place where you can actually meet, share ideas, and make connections with people, very much like, and I've shown this to some of the panel members, this is a really lovely piece of software that we've come across, which we've now got. We're just doing a bit of integration back into Zoom, but that's going to be coming soon. So we're actually going to give you the opportunity as a group to network with each other in little tables. And I've got 50 tables in this particular place, so that's going to be more than enough, I suspect. So watch out for that one. But mainly just to say, I hope you found today valuable. Please encourage your peers to sign up. It's the same link as always. And think about us and what we're trying to do, because we're always obviously looking for new members all the time. So thank you for that. Thank you for the panel. Been a great conversation today. And I think a lot of people will have seen the poll, will have said what we had to say, and that will make them think. And if all we've done is make you think, I'm happy. On which happy note, I should leave you and wish you a great weekend when you get there. Bye for now. Thank you for the panel.